When Joseph got to Egypt, he was sold into slavery, obviously. Now, here's the good news. He was bought by a guy named Potiphar to be over his indoor household. So if you got to be a slave, that's a relatively good gig. It's inside. It's kind of like that's the good news. The bad news was that Potiphar's wife liked little Joe a lot. We don't need to get into that into Sunday school either. But the bottom line is, kept kind of make suggestions. And one day she came in and said, you know, little Joe, have I got a way to kill the morning? Now, I don't know why Joseph had this little towel thing on, not a lot on, maybe he just got out of the shower, I'm not sure what the deal is. But anyway, when she lunged at him, he jerked loose and raced through the window. The coat thing, towel thing came off, without clothing, and was pitter-pattering down the sidewalks, which will make the neighbors cluck. And so when Potiphar came home, he said, what in the world is going on here? And, you know, who are you going to believe? Little Joe said, your wife tried to jump me, and I just did the best I could and had to run. And Potiphar's wife said, oh, no, it's just the other way around. He tried to jump me, and this was just horrible, and I just barely escaped. Well, anyway, so the bad news was little Joe got sold and put into the dungeon. So that's not good. It turned out pretty bad. Well, when he got down there, God's still with him, and there's not much to do. You play games, cards, pinochle, whatever you do, and they chew the fat. And they began to chew the fat, and two of the guys that had been in Pharaoh's court were in hot water, and they were talking about, what's going on? I have these wild dreams, and what does that mean? And Joseph said, well, I can't really do it, but God can interpret it through me, so tell me the dream. They told him the dream, and little Joe said, well, here's the story. In 3 days, the Pharaoh's going to call you two guys up, and he's going to forgive you, and he's going to take your head off. And they said, nah, that's a crazy deal. So they did. Anyway, 3 days came by, and sure enough, the Pharaoh called him up. He forgave this guy and cut his head off, which made a huge impression on this guy. Made a big one on him, too. But this guy over here said, that is the wildest thing I've ever seen in my life. How in the world would he have known that? My. Little Joe's still down in the dungeon. So about this time, the Pharaoh was having dreams. He couldn't figure them out for the life of him. He's stumped. He called all the wise guys, soothsayers. He's really stumped. And, got 7 fat cows come up out of the Nile River, and that's interesting. And then 7 skinny, bony cows come up and eat the fat cows. What's this supposed to mean? Makes my head ache. What is this? So the guy that had his dream interpreted that was still around, had his head, said, wait a minute. There's a little Hebrew guy down in the dungeons, pretty good with dreams. Why don't you call Joe up here, tell him the dream, who knows, maybe he can unpack this thing. So they called Joe up and said, here's the dream, what do you think? I can't do it, God can. And he said, here's what it means. 7 fat cows mean you're going to have 7 bumper crop years, Pharaoh. And so you need to store up a lot of grain. 7 lean cows that came up out of the Nile next, skinny cows, came over and ate the fat cows. That means if you've stored up enough stuff, you're going to be okay. You'll be fine. And so the Pharaoh said, bingo, I think that's it. I do. So he started storing up grain for 7 years. Sure enough, after 7 years, the drought hit. There was no food or water except Egypt was fine. They'd stored it up for 7 years. Meanwhile, back at home, the boys hadn't heard about fat cows, skinny cows, nor had they stored up any grain. But they had read in the paper that you can go down to Egypt, get a bite to eat. So they said, why don't we go down to Egypt, get something to eat? So they went down to Egypt, got something to eat. Who do you think they bumped into but Joe? But Joe's not kind of insignificant anymore because the Pharaoh was so impressed with Joe that he said, I'm going to make you number 2 in my kingdom. I need to scoot over, sit right here. I'm going to get you to sit next to me because you seem to have a connection with God. So when the brothers got there, they were like horrified. Oh my gosh, I know he's mad. Now, I can give him my best excuses, but he probably thinks we do what we want to do. And they tried their best excuses. I can't believe it happened to Joseph. I think it was the sun. It was like a heat stroke. I kind of lost my mind. I can't believe I sold you into slavery. Please forgive me. They threw dust in their hair and pretended they were all devastated. Joseph said, shut up, get up. And he said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Because through this ridiculous series of circumstances, and they are wild, I'm now in a position, number 2, in Egypt, to protect and save the whole family. So come on down. So they did. Now, I have romped you through 50 chapters of Genesis, hit or miss. Now, turn the page, it starts out Exodus. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole scriptures, but I just want to tell you a little bit more. Exodus is where most of us can pick up, because that's where the movie picked up. It starts out with, and then there arose a Pharaoh in Egypt that did not know Joseph. What that meant is a lot of years had passed, 430 years. And the new Pharaoh didn't want to hear about fat cows, skinny cows either. Didn't like the stories about Joseph and all that. All they knew is these Hebrews were taking over best neighborhoods, got everything. I don't like that. I want their stuff. And so, doing what we want to do. And so they enslaved them, and they were stomping in the mud, and the whips were cracking. You remember all that. And so it was really not good, and God got really frustrated. And Moses, who had been, you know that story, so I'll file it by title, but been raised in the Pharaoh's home, got really frustrated too, popped one of the Egyptians, killed him. Didn't mean to hit him quite so hard, but anyway. Now he knew he was in hot water, so he went racing out into the woods, started a new life, got married, had all kinds of sheep and herds and whatever, and he's just out there cooling. I hate Egypt anyway, who cares? One day he was out there kind of reflecting, and he saw this bush that was burning, which was interesting, but what was really interesting, it didn't burn out. And so after about 10, 15 minutes, he thought, what in the world? And so he went down there to check it out. It's God. You know that story, the burning bush. God said, take off your sandals. I got something to say. So took off his sandals and said, what do you want me to do? I want you to go back to Egypt, and I want you to set my people free. And there's a long exchange about all that and why I shouldn't be the one to do it. I don't know how to talk. Aaron's better. My brother's better at that than I am. Please don't do this to me. I don't want... Anyway, long and short, he went back. Went back to the Pharaoh and said, God told me that you need to set my people free. Pharaoh didn't want to do that. So there were a whole series of plagues and stuff. You'd have to read the book. I'm not going to rehearse it right now. Everything kept going wrong. Frogs jumping all over the place, Nile River turning red, all kinds of bad junk. No, the Pharaoh's, no, I'm not going to do it. And so finally, God said, tell him one more time, if he doesn't do this, the angel of death's going to come through and kill the firstborn of everybody, male, of everybody. And the Pharaoh said, get out of here. But if you'll put blood on your door, Israelites, Hebrews, you'll be passed over. Passover. And so they said, let's go for it. So they splattered blood all over their doorpost. Sure enough, here comes this green fog in the movie. And came through, and everybody starts screaming and dying. Firstborn's dying, dropping it. But not you, because you got blood on the doorpost, so you get passed over. And so they're all alive and well. That's when you saw it, if you remember the old movie. Yul Brynner comes out with this dead kid and says, get him out of here. I can't stand it. So he let them go. And that was the Exodus. And they got into the Exodus, and they made it to the Red Sea, and just when they got there, the Pharaoh changed his mind. I'm going to go get them back. This is crazy. I wasn't thinking clearly. And now what are we going to do? You know the story about the part in the water. They went across on dry land, got on the dry land, and the Pharaoh tried to chase them, but then the waters closed up. Don't make me go through the whole story, but when they got onto the other side and they were protected, the first thing they did is Moses went on the top of the mountain and came down with the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments embodied the new deal, the new covenant. And he came down and he said, here's the deal. I got the first 4 deal with our relationship with God. The last 6 deal with our relationship with each other. This is what God wants. How many guys want to do it? And everybody said, I do. The hands all went up. It was all exciting and whatever. There's one problem with the covenant, and that problem is nobody did it. Everybody liked it. You had 10 toes, 10 fingers, 10 commandments. I can remember it. I can go with it. But nobody did it. Now, what are we going to do with the reality that nobody's doing it? And I know, because we do what we want to do, and I don't want to keep that commandment. I'm good for a lot of them. I'm good for 7 or 8 of them. But several of them, I need a little flexibility. I'm a traveling salesman, and I got to have some freedoms and whatever. So what do you do with people that are not inclined to do everything that God would have them do? That's where the good news comes in. This was about, I would say, 1200 BC. If you went beyond that to about 600 BC, this would be 600 years of not keeping the covenant. God began to speak through the prophets. And a giant of the prophets is Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah 31:31, easy to remember, God says, here's the new deal. I'm going to write and strike a new covenant with the people of God, my people. Not like the covenant I made with our forefathers 600 years earlier, my covenant which they broke. But this will be the covenant. I will put my laws within you, and I will write them upon your hearts. And you will be my people, and I will be your God. Now, this is good news. Why is this good news? Well, the good news is I'm not necessarily going to do the externals. Tablets of stone, speed limit signs, whatever. I'm not necessarily going to do that. What I'm going to do is what I want to do, the internals. And that's what God says I know. And so the new covenant that I'm going to strike will be an internal covenant. And so people start saying, wow, that's really, really something. About the same time, another giant, Ezekiel, in chapter Ezekiel 36, began to say, that thus says the Lord, in the times to come with this new covenant, I will put my spirit within you. I will change your heart of stone to a heart of flesh, and I will cause you to walk in my statutes and obey my ordinances. Now that is good news, that you're going to cause me to do this, that you're going to change my heart of stone into a heart of flesh. You're going to, like Jeremiah said, write it upon my heart. That was something they started really looking for. If you go 600 years before that, you come to Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ began to talk about the kingdom of God. And more specifically, he would talk about the kingdom within. Fascinating. Because the prophets had been talking about this for 600 years. And people began to say, oh, what you're talking about, you're bringing this new covenant, and it's going to be within me, and it's going to be written upon my heart, and it's going to change my heart of stone into a heart of flesh, and you'll cause me to walk in your statutes and obey your ordinances. Yes. Now, Jesus had a number of ways to teach. One of the ways that he would teach and explain all of this is he would just do like Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount, and he'd just lay it out there. He'd say, I'm going to give you a gazillion examples, instructions, and stories, and I'm going to teach. The second way he would teach is he would walk out into a crowd and he would engage them in some way. And people would be engaged and he would say, watch what I'm doing, and I'm teaching what I want to communicate. If he cast out a demon, he'd say something like, if by the finger of God I cast out this demon, then know that the kingdom of heaven has come upon you. People go, oh, I get it. So it's more than just the guy's got a demon cast out, which is good news, but it's really a demonstration of the good news itself. Release to the captives, freedom, salvation. And people began to say, that's fascinating the way you interact with us and teach that second way. The third way he would teach is through stories or illustrations or show-me's or for examples. He called them parables. And if you look to Matthew 13, you would see a series of parables in which Jesus tries to explain to us this new kingdom within and how it works and how it's going to be good news for us, given that we don't do the externals, we do the internals. I know it, and I'm going to fix your internals. And so if you looked at Matthew 13, you started with, say, verse 44, you would see the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has to buy the field. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure. That's something you want. You don't have to be told, you know, you really ought to win the lottery. You really ought to pick up that treasure and take it home and show the wife and kids. Nobody has to tell me I ought to do that. Why? Because I want a treasure. That's something in my joy, I'm going after that. Jesus is saying, that's what I'm trying to tell you. That is what I'm trying to tell you. It's an internal wanna. You actually want it. They said, boy, that's really getting clear. Give me one more. Okay.